What is up, everyone? Prometheus here. So today I'd like to talk about my favorite movie of all time, The Lord of the Rings: The Return of the King. Wow, what a shocker! This is probably a lot of people's the Lord of the Rings trilogy is probably a lot of people's favorite movies of all time. Me, I just I can't get enough of this film. I can't get enough of the entire trilogy. It is almost unanimously considered the greatest movie trilogy of all time, and for great reasoning, with few other trilogies living up to it. Now, in my last video, I talked about why I hate Rise of Skywalker. It is my actual least favorite movie of all time, and it's just bad. Like, the only good thing about that film is the visuals. And with this film, however, I love everything about this movie. I have zero problems. It is one of the only movies I would give a 10 out of 10. Like, there's only a few dozen films I'd give a 10 out of 10. Like, maybe a little over 30. Which, yeah, that sounds like a lot. But, like, there's a lot of other critics who give tons of movies 10s. But me, I'm a bit more niche. I want to... The films need to truly earn that 10 out of 10. And Return of the King is probably one of my best examples of a 10 out of 10 film. And there's a whole bunch of other examples of 10 out of 10 movies. Like, a whole bunch of good examples of masterpieces. Like, one, The Godfather. That's a great film. In fact, I think that The Godfather is a better movie than Return of the King. Like, I like Return of the King better than The Godfather, as well as Godfather Part 2. I like... Return of the King's my favorite overall, but, like, Godfather Part 1 and 2 are better than Return of the King. Not to say that Return of the King's bad at all. Not at all. It's still one of my top 10 movies of all time. But these are all-time classics. This is also an all-time classic. Like, it has aged so well. The entire trilogy has aged so well. Like I just had my 13th rewatch of the year. Just putting some dishes away. Sorry, I have quite a messy workspace, but yeah, I just rewatched the trilogy, and they're all great. Like, yeah, Return of the King is easily the best of the trilogy, but Fellowship of the Ring is also a near perfect film, and Two Towers, despite being the weakest in the trilogy, is still great. Like, the only, like, yeah, it has the most flaws of the movies, but it still has only, like, 2 or 3 minor problems. Like, I guess the stuff at the ends were kind of boring, and the film does start up a bit slower, but that's about it. I'd still give this Two Towers, like, a high 90s score. Like, Fellowship of the Ring, like a 9.9. Like, this, I'd probably give like a 9.5, 9.6, maybe even 9.7. But Return of the King's a 10 out of 10, for sure. Like, the only problem I had with Fellowship of the Ring was, I guess, the scene where Gandalf leaves Frodo with the ring and then goes to Minas Tirith to kind of read the archives before returning. In the books, that he left him with the ring for like 17 years, whereas in the film, yeah, technically it still is 17 years, but it makes it feel like only a few days passed. That's really the only problem I have with the film, really. Whereas Return of the King, absolute perfection, peak cinema. Like, I love this film so much. In fact, there are only like there are only, maybe I'd say, like 5 or 6 movies I think are a little better than it. Like, they're not to say it's a 10 out of 10 film, and some 10 out of 10 films are better than other 10 out of 10 movies, like Godfather Part 2. That's like an 11 out of 10 movie. Godfather Part 1, 10 out of 10 for sure, but Godfather Part 2, 11 out of 10. Now, let me get to why I love Lord of the Rings: Return of the King. After watching Return of the King again, it helps me appreciate it so much more after getting fresh off of Rise of Skywalker, my least favorite movie of all time, because Return of the King and Rise of Skywalker are both finale movies. They're both final movies in trilogies, final movies in series. Like, this is the final Lord of the Rings movie. Rise of Skywalker is the final Skywalker saga movie in the Star Wars franchise. And it sucked as a finale, whereas this is the perfect finale. Some people say that a problem with Lord of the Rings: Return of the King is it has too many endings. I don't care. I think its endings are perfect because each provides a good and a solid, a perfect conclusion for each character. That it's like each of the ending scenes in the movie are fantastic, and I would not consider that a flaw at all. So whoever says that, you're wrong. Return of the King has nothing going against it. The only thing adjacent to a flaw is that there is this 1 second, there's a shot in the film that's a few seconds where Gollum is on Frodo, and it just looks like he's floating there. I guess that's kind of goofy and kind of conflicts with the dark tone of the scene, but that's only a few seconds. Do you really want me to kick off a point from this film score just for a few second scene? Not at all. I do not care. This film has aged better than most films. This entire trilogy has aged better than most films. The only other trilogy that I think could have been better the Lord of the Rings trilogy is, of course, the Godfather trilogy. The first two are masterpieces, some of the greatest movies of all time. And then along came Part 3, which, yeah, I don't think Part 3 is a bad movie by any means. It's maybe a 6.5 out of 10. Has some good elements, but it is such a drop in quality when compared to the previous two movies. And it's disappointing. Return of the King, the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy, consistency. That is what I love about these films. Starts out near perfect with Fellowship. Still continues to be great with Two Towers, which I love equally. Yeah, sure, weakest in the trilogy, but still, it's still a great bridge. It's a bridge between these two films, which are better films, but man, is this a sturdy bridge. Strongest, really strong bridge between these two films. It's still an amazing, fantastic, it's still a masterpiece of a film. And the few problems I have with it are really just nitpicks. There's not a single thing that these films fail at. Every, music, story, characters, effects, the balance of CGI and practical effects. It's done so well. And it's... Return of the King, Fellowship already had so many iconic scenes. Two Towers had the Battle of Helm's Deep, but Return of the King has everything that's great about the trilogy, as well as Payoff. Payoff is the real thing that I love about this film. We get the payoff. We see the work that they go through all pay off in the end to save Middle-earth. Whereas in Rise of Skywalker, oh, yeah, there's payoff. But at what cost? They have too many conveniences. Everything's so easy. Rey doesn't deserve to be considered a great Jedi. Return of the King. I wanted Aragorn to become the king. Whereas Rey, yeah, she's a good person. She does go through some stuff, but I don't think she deserved the Skywalker name, nor the title of the greatest Jedi ever that shall bring down Palpatine again, which was a stupid decision. I don't think she deserved it as much as other Jedi who genuinely went through so much. The reason why I love the Star Wars original trilogy is Luke is a great character. Easily the best protagonist in the franchise. Hayden Christensen's Anakin was kind of divisive. Obi-Wan Kenobi's goated, though. But Return of the King, I think Aragorn's my favorite character in the trilogy, but Sam and Frodo are great. Yeah, sure, Frodo's the main character, but I feel in this trilogy, the entire Fellowship are the main characters. Because they each, sure, yeah, Legolas and Gimli don't get as much time to shine as Aragorn or Sam or Frodo, but that's not a problem. They're still charming characters. But Aragorn, Sam, Frodo, they each get their own focus. They each get their time to shine. That's why I think Aragorn is just as much as a protagonist as Sam and Frodo. And Gollum, he's great. Return of the King has so many iconic scenes and battle sequences. The battle of Pelennor Fields, the Last Stand at the Black Gate. So many iconic lines and scenes that genuinely get me, just genuinely give me goosebumps. You bow to no one, the coronation of Aragorn, that final shot. I always choke up whenever I see Frodo just embark to the Undying Lands. It is so just amazing. This film has great story, great character. Characters go through their final arc. It just works so well. It's paced so well. It's the film's 4 hours long. This is the extended edition, but yeah, each character gets their endings. There is no shortage of impressive scenes, beautiful scenes. One thing that I love so much about these trilogies, about the Lord of the Rings trilogy, is that they each bring the world to life so well. The Middle-earth itself is a character in these movies. And the music, when the music plays as they explore this vast world that was shot on location, by the way, it feels like this world is alive, and it makes me want to go to New Zealand because it's the closest thing we'll get to Middle-earth in real life. But I've only left the country. I've only left Canada once in my life, and that was to go to Florida, and that went as well as you thought it would. The people. It was a zoo for drunk Americans. Now, yes, we went to all those nice amusement parks like Disney World, Universal, and Epcot, and all those places. Cause yeah, it was expensive, sure, like $10,000, I think, but man, was it worth it. But at the same time, yeah, I could definitely see why the U.S. has its issues for sure. But Middle Earth, like, despite it being a dangerous world with the threat of the orcs, like, yeah, sure, if I had to live in Middle Earth, I'd probably live in like the fourth age after Sauron's been defeated. But like, its beauty, like, the world feels so beautiful, and you want to see it be saved. You don't want this beauty to be destroyed by the orcs. So when you finally see them drop that ring into Mount Doom, when you finally see Sauron's tower crumble and the world is saved, you feel the payoff. It feels so good, so satisfying. Each of the endings are so satisfying. This film is such a satisfying film to watch. Like, the acting is fantastic. This entire trilogy is great. Sometimes I just like to view them as one big movie. But if I had to rank them, yeah, Two Towers in third, Fellowship in second, but Return of the King first. Two Towers, again, fantastic masterpiece of a film. It really shows how great this trilogy is when the weakest movie in the trilogy is still a masterpiece. And Return of the King is the crowning jewel in this crown of fantastic films. Godfather trilogy could have been the all-time greatest if it weren't for this one being a disappointment. And yeah, so if I ever become a film teacher or something, I would teach these films a lot. I would give good examples. Like, let's say the kids asked me, "Hey, give us a good example of great films." Well, I could give them these two films. Godfather Part 2. Like, they said, give me examples of 10 out of 10 masterpiece movies. The Godfather duology, Return of the King, and Two Towers and Fellowship, not 10 out of 10s, but still high 90s, still close to it. I'd give those as good examples of great, just masterpieces. A lot of other movies I could use as examples of masterpieces. Let's see, what else could I use as an example of a masterpiece? Blade Runner 2049, that's also a fantastic movie. What else? What do we got here? Interstellar, that's a great example I could teach about. What else is another great trilogy? Like, yeah, these aren't masterpieces, but they're still a really consistent trilogy. But Back to the Future is another one of the all-time greatest movie trilogies. Each of them are great. I still really like them. Like, they're not masterpieces by any means, but they're still absolute classics that are great sci-fi movies, fun adventures. Like, they're great. They're like the Lord of the Rings trilogy of sci-fi. Actually, no, I'd say the Lord of the Rings trilogy of sci-fi movies is the Dune trilogy. It's not finished yet, but I know Dune Messiah is going to be great. In fact, it could even live up to the Lord of the Rings trilogy and even compete with it. Now, let's say the class asked me examples of just movies that are just good, like films that are just good. Well, what do I got? What examples do I got? What examples do I got? Good movies like Seven, low 80s, stuff like that. Joker. Joker's a good movie. I don't think it's a masterpiece. Like, it's still a good movie, like maybe 7 or 8 out of 10. But yeah, it's good. I mentioned this before, but Force Awakens, I think it's a good movie. Like, not the best sequel, but it's still a good movie. That would be a good example of, like, it started off strong. Another example of a really... Actually, no, this is a great movie, but Rogue One, A Star Wars Story, that's a great movie. I think it's better than the entirety of the sequel trilogy, for sure. And what else could I give examples of good movies? Howl's Moving Castle. Like, yeah, people call this a masterpiece. This is going to be a bit controversial, but I don't think it's a masterpiece. Like, everyone else does, but, like, it has some problems with like plot structure and how, like, how like certain plot points work and some confusing elements. Like if you want to know like the real issues this movie has, just listen to Schaeferless. The YouTuber Schaeferless Productions talks about its issues perfectly in his ranking video. Like I still think it's a really good movie, but I don't think it's like the absolute masterpiece people have been making it out to be. And now let's say they asked me, give me examples of all right movies that are okay, like 6, maybe 7, low 70s. Hobbit, Battle of the Five Armies, weakest movie in the Hobbit trilogy. I think the Hobbit trilogy is actually pretty solid, but this is its lowest point. I'd give it like a 6, 6.5 out of 10. I still think it has good elements, but like the bad elements in this movie do kind of pile up. Anyways, and I think the perfect example of a film that is kind of middle ground, like okay, I guess, not really a good film, but not bad, is of course Godfather Part 3. Like it has its good elements, like the Michael Corleone is still great. His arc is fine, but man, that performance from Coppola's daughter is horrible. But yeah, it's still a okay conclusion, I guess, and it still concludes it okay. Now, let's say they asked me for examples of bad movies. Well, I got some good examples right here. Let's see. I got this. In fact, I could just throw in the entire live-action remakes. Why not? This is also a good example of a bad movie. This film sucks. What else can I use examples for? What else can I use it as an example? There's a lot of really bad animated movies, like this one. Yeah, I loved this as a kid. Rewatching it now, it's horrible. And if they had to ask me examples of outright horrid movies, well, of course, Rise of Skywalker would be in there. But if I had to give an even worse movie, well, man, do I got the film for you. Do I even need to explain this? No, I don't. Those are okay. That's a lot. Those are all examples of films: good films, bad films, okay films, great films, very good films, masterpieces. But if I had to choose one film to use as an example of a masterpiece of everything we love about cinema meshed into one movie, it would be Return of the King for sure. Because there's great scenes, great characters. You grow to care for this world. Like the entire trilogy would be a great example of great filmmaking. Because really, they don't fail at anything. Everything that they do is great. The only problems they have are really, really, really small problems. They're really just nitpicks. Return of the King, though, is a 10 out of 10 movie. I have watched this film so many times. Every time I watch Lord of the Rings trilogy, I always look forward to seeing this one. Like, I love watching Return of the King. I mean, I love watching Two Towers and Fellowship. Great films. But man, Return of the King, it just hits different. Like, all these films hit really well, but Return of the King just hits differently. It tugs at your heartstrings. It gives you an adrenaline boost. You gotta. What's up, Loki? Anyways, but yeah, Return of the King just has everything: emotion, even some romance. Hey, stop! No, my dishes. Get your own dishes. Yeah, but Return of the King does a great job at just displaying so many different great filming techniques, cinematography, the entire trilogy again. But Return of the King, I feel, is the best example of this. It's like, it feel like the film is over 4 hours long, but man, you just want it to be even longer. It just, beautiful movie that I absolutely love. My favorite movie of all time, Lord of the Rings trilogy. My favorite movies of all time. Like, yeah, there's other films in this stack that I really like. Blade Runner is a real one I love. These two, I love them. Godfather Part 2, you're a disappointment. I don't even know why I still have this film. I don't know why I still have this one either. But Yeah, it's like whenever I get off watching a bad movie, like disappointing movies that remind me of the downfall of cinema, I always go back to the classic ones like Godfather, all the films I have in the VHS collection, which are currently in the back. But the films that I always go back to re-experience what good, great, masterful filmmaking looks like, I go back to Lord of the Rings trilogy. Greatest movie trilogy of all time, greatest movie series of all time, the most award-winning movie series of all time, and Return of the King is tied with Ben-Hur and Titanic as the most award-winning movie of all time. But I think it's the best of those three movies. Like, Titanic's great, Ben-Hur is also great, but Return of the King is on a whole nother level. Like, there is so much stuff I could talk about with this film. What is my favorite scene from the movie? Like, there are so many great scenes in the film. Like I mentioned before, the practical effects they used with Miss Tirith. Yeah, you thought that was CGI? No, that was a large miniature. Like, the practical effects in these movies are great. Return of the King, although it definitely uses some CGI too, the CGI still looks good. I mean, yeah, sure, like a lot of CGI today looks better. Some of the CGI in the Hobbit trilogy looks better. Some of the CGI in the Rings of Power, Rings of Power, even that, some of the CGI in that looks better. But this, I still think the CGI looks good, and the practical effects are timeless. Like, whenever I get off watching Rings of Power, I go back, like, I just finished watching season 2 of Rings of Power. It was a little better than the first season, whatever, 6 out of 10. But I just went back to watching the original Lord of the Rings trilogy, and even the Hobbit trilogy. Like, I still, like, as flawed as it is, I grew up with the Hobbit trilogy, and I still think it's solid enough, like 7 out of 10, whatever. Desolation of Smaug is actually pretty great. But Return of the King is greatness incarnate when it comes to film. Where you going, dog? But, yeah, I watched the Lord of the Rings trilogy, like, around a dozen times a year, and I've been doing this for, like, what, 12, 13, like, around 15 years I've been watching this trilogy a dozen times a year, so do your math. I've seen it hundreds of times. And I'm not stopping anytime soon. I'm going to be watching this trilogy until I am old. I grew up watching it as a kid. I still liked it as a teen, and yeah, it's still like it now. It's fantastic movie, and like, it succeeds everywhere where the Lord of the where Rise of Skywalker fails. Rise of Skywalker, it just added, like, oh, payoff after payoff after payoff. Oh, you succeed here, you succeed there, without any loss. Whereas in this film, there's payoff, but it comes from hard work with a lot of pain, struggle, and loss of hope. But we are still given hope by Aragorn, his speech at the Black Gate, and overall there's payoff, but even then that payoff comes at a cost, and Frodo has to leave Middle-earth because he hasn't healed. And it is so fantastic. It is so fantastically done. The emotions, you get to care about these characters. One thing that I love about this trilogy is just how the actors just they just sink, they get lost in the character, and you feel like you're not watching. It doesn't feel like you're watching some actors act these fantasy characters. You feel like you're watching the real characters. These aren't actors. These are actual people going on an actual quest with actual goals. The Lord of the Rings trilogy is so well done, it feels like you're not even watching a movie, like you're watching actual events unfold. These characters are actually, they're not being acted. Ian McKellen, like, when you're watching Gandalf, you're not watching Ian McKellen. I mean, technically you are, but Ian McKellen's performance is so good that just might as well be Gandalf. That is exactly what he would be like if you imagined him. Or, let's say you're watching Aragorn. That's not Viggo Mortensen, that's the actual character. That is how good their performances are. And I'm so happy that this franchise is coming back with Peter Jackson. Like, sure, his work on the Hobbit trilogy wasn't perfect, but I think he could still pull off the upcoming Hunt for Gollum and the other one pretty well. If they do a Silmarillion movie, I think it should be animated. But if they do it live action, then they better have some really good CGI, because a lot of the stuff in that they're not pulling off with practical effects. And if they make a Silmarillion TV series, don't give it to Amazon. Peter Jackson should do it. Let him do it. He's a great filmmaker. And what else? Characters. Oh yeah, Sauron, great villain. Like he doesn't have a physical presence aside from the eye at the top of Barad-dûr, but even then, you feel his presence throughout the film. He's a great villain, even though he makes barely makes any physical appearance there. You just feel his influence. That's why Sauron is still one of my favorite characters in the trilogy, despite having no physical appearance in the film. Like, it's there's so many. There's not a single bad character, not a single bad performance in this trilogy. Not a single bad scene, not a single bad shot, not a single bad track. Like, even though I find the Ents arc in Two Towers a bit boring and out of place, it's still solid. It's still pretty good. It's still good downtime between all the stuff that's happening in Two Towers. And really, it's the only true misstep this trilogy takes, outside of some of the nitpicks I have. Like, I love these films so much that nitpicking them honestly hurts me so much. So much so that I honestly just feel like giving these two films 10 out of 10s. Like, subjectively, all three of them are 10 out of 10s. Objectively, 9.9, 9.6, 9.7 maybe. But this is a 10. Like, Rise of Skywalker was a 4, but this is a 10. I absolutely love Return of the King so much. In fact, I'm going to go rewatch it again. I rewatched these films so much. Not only is Return of the King and the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy my favorite movies of all time, they're my second favorite pieces of media of all time. I'll get to my number one in a separate video, but I actually just discovered it fairly recently. And wow, it blew me away. Like, fantastic. And, well, yeah, I don't know what to say about Lord of the Rings. I am a really big fan of it. Like in the current state of entertainment, you know, with all the wokeness, all the money thing, and the content that all the films and movies and TV shows, and film and movies the same thing, but all the movies, TV shows, and anime and video games that aren't turning out that good, I return to stuff like Return of the King, Lord of the Rings trilogy, or good old video games, or good old TV series. I'm not much of an anime fan. Like, I still watch anime, but I still love Studio Ghibli, still a massive fan. I binge-watched Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. It's one of my favorite pieces of media ever. I'm a fan of Gundam. I have a Gundam model over there. I like anime, but I'm not like a die-hard fan of it, unless we're talking like Ghibli or Fullmetal Alchemist. And like the current state of anime, like, yeah, there's a lot of great series out there, but it's always just filler arcs and long-winded stories and cliches and tropes and over-reliance on action. Like, Jujutsu Kaisen fans, name something in Jujutsu Kaisen that's good other than the action. I'm kidding, there's probably other good things about it, but really just what I'm saying is the modern day entertainment industry isn't perfect. And yeah, it wasn't perfect back then either, but at least back then they were like movies. The greatness of movies back then is never going to be topped by any modern day movies, unless it's like Denis Villeneuve or Nolan. Then yeah, of course it's going to be reached. But Return of the King just reminds me of the good old days of cinema. Movies, like, yeah, sure, the good old days of cinema came before Return of the King, the golden age, like Lawrence of Arabia, the Godfather trilogy. What else? What other films? Like, Return of the King isn't unlike those films, but what I love it is because it's like, it feels like it's the last of the big epic movies that had dedication behind it, like Ben-Hur, Cleopatra, Ten Commandments. All those films had real large city sets built for them. Return of the King, although I don't think it's like, Return of the King had like the Lord of the Rings trilogy had a enormous production, shot on location, large actors, so much practical effects, so many practical sets and stuff. Like, Return of the King Lord of the Rings trilogy feels like it's the last of the big epic movies with where almost everything was real. Even with CGI, they still balance it out with good practical effects. Like, They will. I don't think anyone, like, unless it's Denis Villeneuve, then yeah, probably. But I don't think any directors these days could replicate, because they don't have the same amount of dedication. Like, yeah, people still dedicate the films these days, but people do not have the same amount of dedication as they did back then. Rise of Skywalker is a great example of how film has went downhill recently. Like, yeah, there's great films. Dune Part 2 is a masterpiece. One of my top 3 sci-fi movies of all time, right behind 2001: A Space Odyssey and Stalker. Man, let me tell you about Stalker. I'll talk about that in a different video, but I'm saying Return of the King and the Lord of the Rings trilogy feels like they're the last of the truly great movies of the olden days, where they actually felt like art rather than just things made for money or for fan service or for nostalgia bait. Like, again, modern day films these days, they're still great movies. Ghibli's still working at it. Triple R is great. The Dune trilogy is great. Spider-Man Spider-Verse movies are great. Gladiator 2 is shaping up to be a great epic. I think that's another return for the epic genre. But, like, I think Lord of the Rings Return of the King is potentially the best movie of the 21st century thus far. I mean, there could be others if I think about it. I'm yet to watch movies like Whiplash, Parasite, Hereditary, or Social Network, which I also hear some of the best of the century. But yeah, I don't think they could top this one. I think this is one of the best picture winners of all time. Like, yeah, sure, there's the Godfather movies, of course, you can't forget those. But this is my favorite movie of all time and one of my favorite pieces of media of all time. And if you haven't watched the Lord of the Rings trilogy, this is, like I said, people are entitled to their opinions, but if you don't like Lord of the Rings trilogy, who hurt you? What happened? If you don't like the trilogy, watch it again and again and again until it snaps in your head and you end up liking it. That is how much I love this trilogy, and how much, like, Rise of Skywalker reminded me why I loved Return of the King so much. Everything that film I love. Everything in this film I love. Almost everything in Rise of Skywalker I hated. Thank you for watching, and if you can excuse me, I'm going to go watch Return of the King one more time before the end of the day. See you next one.